we hope that we'll be able to post this one online after we're done. The PowerPoint's already there, but we wanted to add a little bit more of the discussion part of things. We wanted to do something a little different this time around because the basic CIEP workshop to me was starting to feel a little bit stale. And so this time we've changed things up by asking some people who've had a lot of experience and successful experience with CIEP to talk about how they approached a particular program or how they approached leading CIEP at their institution. So we hope that you'll get some good ideas from the voices of peers. And we also have some examples to look at both in the state and some SPA examples that we want to look at. We do want to ask people to make sure that they're on mute. We did have some issues with the first session about too many interruptions to be able to use that. And then if you put your video on not working, then that will also preserve bandwidth and may make it easier for us to get through this without any technology interruptions. We want to ask you to please put your name and your institution in the chat box so that we can send you a professional development certificate for your time this afternoon. Let's see. We also want to encourage people to continue to use the chat box. I see a lot of you already are. To ask any questions, Amanda in Avenant, my colleague, will be monitoring that. She's actually the producer and director. I'm just the MC for this. And she'll be monitoring that. We're going to take breaks now and then and have a parking lot where we can address some of those questions. We have let's see, a couple of reminders. Did I cover all the housekeeping things? Yes. So we're on the slide now about updates and reminders. Can I advance this, Amanda, or do you need to do that? We will say that Amanda and I consider ourselves to be developmentally delayed with using big Zoom meetings because you all have been doing this since last March on a routine basis, and we've been doing it sometimes, but not on a routine basis. So this is only our second big one. So we're be patient with us as we navigate through it all. I have a couple of updates and remind.
Dr. Kozlowski, will you really quickly just remind everyone the two things about muting and to add their name in, because we've just had about 15 people join in the last minute.
Sure. If you could add your name and your institution into the chat box, we will prepare professional development certificates for you and get them to you. And if you could put yourself on mute and not use your camera, it will help us preserve bandwidth and make sure that we'll be able to use this recording to post online afterwards. The good news is the backlog is gone. I have one program from Judson that I have promised Leslie Sheik to get done next week. We have some new programs that have come in the last month. I think they're all middle level programs, but that's not backlog if they just came in. Amanda has worked so hard for the last almost 2 years now to try to make sure that we got caught up, and we are caught up. And I don't know which one of us is more excited. We found out last year that institutions that had comprehensive reviews this year had submitted their analysis forms sometimes up to 2 years before the site visit. And that's too far in advance because things will change. So please make sure that you turn in analysis forms the summer before the site visit. Even if it's in September or October, that will be the most current version of the standards and indicators in the analysis forms that you have to address. If you submitted them already for a fall visit, we're probably going to have to ask you to do that again, but please just get back in touch with us, with myself or with Dr. Meyer. If that's your situation, we'll help you work through it. We had another issue last year where some people used standards that were in existence prior to 2018 And it was probably because they were trying to get ahead and to use what was available through other workshops and online, but it caused a problem in a couple of areas where we had to ask people either in whole or in part to redo some things. So make sure you're using the 2018 standards. Those are on the website today in the CHIP documents. And if you have any doubt or confusion, please don't hesitate to ask me or an Amanda, are you sure that it's the right form? We had a, a request to make a change in our special education forms. We had put all special education into one document, and I think it was Montevallo said, that's really getting big and bulky, and their deaf and hard of hearing program was really not similar to the collaborative or early childhood special ed. And so we've separated those out. We've had some issues with our website lately, putting new things on there. So if you want anything separated out for something like that, please don't hesitate to call and ask, and we'll be glad to try to get that to you as quickly as we possibly can. All right. This is really intended to be an advanced CHIP workshop, and I just know, seeing all the names, that many of you have done CHIPs, you've been at multiple meetings, you're working on revisions, and so you have a lot of experience to bring to this. If this is your very first CHIP meeting, we're probably going to make you a little lightheaded and dizzy. You really will want to go back and look at the 2020 workshops when we all went into the virtual world last March. Amanda figured out how to use Zoom to make a voiced over PowerPoint and prepare handouts. So those are all there. There are 4 of them in different sections on how to prepare a CHIP document, very, very basic level. So if this is new to you, get what you can out of it and go back afterwards and look at the basics. I did want to give you an overview of the CHIP process, but this year from the point of view of a reviewer. The first thing a reviewer will look at is the curriculum section. So they go through the CHIP document, they look at all the places that you have said you address a particular standard or indicator, and they say, yes, it's adequately addressed, or no, it's not adequately addressed. When they go through all of that, then they go and they do the field experiences. And the first thing they'll do is read through the field experience assignments that you've submitted. They will look at the section 4 chart in the submission form. They will look at the field experience rubric, and they will use that rubric to make comments in the report that are the overall comments about your field experiences. Then they go back and they look at each standard to see if the field experiences clearly address the standard. And for field experiences, they don't have to address all of the indicators, but they do have to address the standard overall. Then they'll move on to the key assessments. Like, they'll hold each key assessment up to the rubric for key assessments, and they will make marks. We actually have a checkbox system now that the team uses. And they'll make any comments about any concerns that they see about how field experiences are set up. Maybe it could be as something as simple as you didn't have ranges or frequencies in there. They make those comments. Then they go back and they look under each standard. They go back to your submission form and they say, all right, they said they used 1A praxis. Does praxis really cover this standard? And they might say, for a standard that says elementary teaches all the different content areas, well, it shows knowledge of the content areas. So yes, it provides some evidence for it, but by itself, it's not going to cover that standard. They do that for each key assessment. They do that technical overview. They make the comments based on the rubric. This is what shows up at the very end of the CHIP report that you receive. And then they go back and they hold it up to the standards and indicators as it was identified by the EPP in the submission form. Every year we preach to our reviewers, if they didn't do the work, you don't do it for them. So it's really critical that our programs clearly show the alignment on what they're doing throughout the CHIP process. When the reviewers do all of that, and the first time they do it, it takes easily a day to do it. Then they go back and they look at each standard and they say, okay, we know what's good or bad, we've made all these notes and comments. So overall, is the standard met? Is it met with conditions? And the conditions have to be related to the indicators and the rubrics? Or is it just not met at all because there are just significant problems throughout? So that determines how they make a decision about the standard, they make a recommendation about the standard. That information goes into the summary chart. And from that, we ask them to say, so overall, what do you think about the program? Is it ready? Is it fully met? No problems? Everything's shiny in it? Is it met with conditions? And most people get met with conditions or not met the first time they submit for a program. Not met means you really probably didn't understand the process, or there were serious problems in how things were documented going through the submission. We have found over time things are getting much better in terms of we're getting more going back met with conditions, and a lot fewer denials are going back. So that's all very good. The next slide is about curriculum and reviewer feedback. Do we skip a slide? The shotgun approach slide? That one. Or did I go too fast?
It's
I'll
fine.
talk about this one, then we'll go back to, okay. Reviewers have found a couple of problems. One is the shotgun approach, which is listing every class or just about every class for an indicator. And I know sometimes when we talk to people about that, they'll say, but we do everything everywhere. Well, that's nice, but why do you need more than one class then? So what are the classes that mostly focus on it? And it really depends on a specific indicator. We don't have a flat out number that says all indicators must have at least this many or no more than this many. If it's something like knowledge of discrete math and you put a discrete math course down, that's good. That's really good. But you do get some really big ones where you have to list multiple courses. Just make sure that the courses clearly address the indicator and that the course descriptions support that. Repeating indicators still happens. This is when people go through the first step, which is to say, okay, where are we going to put these courses? I just think of it as dealing out cards. But the indicators are just there. They've been retyped. There's no sense of what the course is like. There's no sense of how they've consolidated some things, because there is some repetition in some of the standards and indicators. There's no sense of what candidates are expected to do. There's no sense of how it fits within the program. So I would encourage you, if that's the comment that you get back about repeating indicators, go back and look at last year's documents. There's some really good examples of how other institutions in the past have come up with a unique way of doing course descriptions. The University of South Alabama came up with adding assignments that are listed there. And that has been a way to say, oh yes, that health program really does make them do a study of local conditions with health and the children in the school, or whatever it might be. Simply listing an indicator, standard and indicator 3.2, whatever, doesn't get it done. Last year, somebody had been very impressed with listing prerequisites for a course. They thought that was helpful, and seeing how it felt it was in the entire program. That's not required, but you certainly can do that if you want to. We did have 2 comments from reviewers last year, and I just wanted you all to hear them. When people just repeat indicators or list all the courses for everything, the comments were that no thought went into any of it. It's just a lazy way to do it. It's just retyping. And we expect more to come out of all of this. We've also had a problem, particularly in elementary and some of the alt-A programs, with people listing pedagogy courses for content knowledge. Certainly an elementary math methods course is going to use some math, but it's not as strong in math content as the 4x12. And the 4x12 can be listed even as the 4x12 if you don't require specific courses on the checklist. Okay. We, as I mentioned before, we asked some people to talk about their experiences so you can hear how others have approached doing CHIP. And the first voice that we have for you is Dr. Ahmad Alhamouri at Jacksonville State University. And he just exudes a love of math. And he's going to talk about how he approached doing the CHIP process. So let's hear from Dr. Alhamouri.
Hello everyone, my name is Ahmad Alhamouri. I'm an assistant professor of mathematics education at Jacksonville State University. Today I would like to share my experience concerning the CHIP process. Last year I was in your shoes. I was trying to figure out how I could survive the CHIP process. I ended up attending a professional development program that was offered here at JSU by the Alabama State Department of Education. I read the the instructions for the CHIP report. I came to a realization that the CHIP process is an opportunity for us to review and revise our programs to make sure that we are meeting some essential standards that any pre-service teacher should have before going to the field. So the CHIP process is not something like here we have the standards, here we have our programs, and our programs should match these standards no matter what. Rather, it's an opportunity for us to make any necessary changes that are required in order to make sure that we are meeting the essential standards as they defined by the CHIP report. Let me give an example. We ended up creating two new courses that are called the Quantitative Reasoning 1 and the Quantitative Reasoning 2, in which we can address standards for mathematical practices and also address the math content for the high school level, but from advanced point. Also, we ended up communicating with other colleagues in other departments and asked them if they were willing to make any necessary change in the courses that they are teaching in order to make or to meet some certain standards from the CHIP as they defined by CHIP. And of course, my colleagues were so helpful and supportive. And then after we look at the courses, we look at their materials and we try to make sure that we are meeting the standards as they defined by CHIP. We looked at the key assessments that we are having. And here we want to make sure that we have key assessments that align with the courses that we're teaching and align with the standards that we're trying to address as they defined by CHIP. And here I want to emphasize the importance of making sure that these key assessments are relevant to the student's teaching field. For example, if I have a common observation rubric that's used by everyone in the School of Education or in my department, then I may need to add another component to that common observation rubric that is relevant to different teaching fields and that are offered by my department or by my college. For example, for math folks, I would have a component that focuses on the standards as they for pre-service teachers as they defined by the National Councils of Teachers of Mathematics. So after making sure that I have my materials, I have my courses that address these standards, and also I have key assessments that align with the courses and with the standards, I can go ahead and start write my report. And remember, in the report, you write a story to tell the reviewers how your program is relevant and addresses the standards as they defined by CHIP. Here, definitely I would avoid, for example, copy and paste from the course catalog. Rather, I would write a clear description to tell how each course addresses its standards. And here I wouldn't assume, for example, the reviewer would know for sure because, oh yes, this course, it has to address these standards. No, rather I need to make sure to write clear and specific description how this course addresses its standards. Also, I want to make sure that when I include the key assessments and include a description for the field experience, that the assessments and the field experience also is relevant to what? To the students' teaching field. Definitely everything I'm writing in my report should be something I will be doing if I get approved. And remember, at any point throughout this process, if you have any questions or comments, remember to contact the Alabama State Department of Education, because folks there are so helpful and supportive. And if I remember somebody there, Anna, thank you for all of your support during the journey, the CHIP journey that I had last year. So you can make it, and take it easy and look at it as an experience and as an opportunity to review and revise our programs to make sure that we are graduating successful teachers. Have a good day.
I think what I like most about Ahmad's message is it's really focused on this is program specific review. It's not a generic teacher program. It's a math teacher program in his case, and you have to look at things through the eyes of the faculty members who are teaching it. Really, only the faculty for the program can do the best job with the CHIP, because they're the ones who really understand the meaning of all the different indicators and the importance of it, and can see how things will flow together. I will point out one thing about math. Standard 2 in math is mostly about people's practices as a mathematician. We see a lot of times that only the pedagogy course, math methods course is listed for that. And that won't be enough. It really needs to talk about the math competencies that future math teachers will have. I don't think we have Ahmad on here, but if anyone has general questions about what he presented, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And if we can't answer them, we'll follow up some way with him to get an answer. He also talked about asking questions about the State Department, as you're going along. One of the things you'll see later on is unique key assessment 2 that had come in from his programs, and it focuses more on a unique assessment, not the standard GPA analysis, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with starting with a GPA analysis for content knowledge. That can be more challenging for the all-day programs, and he'll have an example of what they came up with for that. Another person that we asked to make a presentation today was Dr. Derek Davis. I know many of you know Dr. Davis. He has had a lot of experience with CHIP at 2 institutions and has really led the charge on how to think about it. And so we asked him to talk about, what do you want people to know about how to approach that? So let's roll Derek Davis's tape and see what we can learn from that.
Good morning. I am Dr. Derek Davis, and I'm here today to enlighten you on how to get started with the CHIP process. And this is from a university perspective, meaning some approaches that I found beneficial in approaching getting started with the CHIP process. Number one, who do you need to talk to? Well, in my experiences, I've found that the most effective method for planning this process is to definitely have your provost of the university informed of the CHIP process, meaning all of the requirements, all of the stakeholders that are needing to be involved to make for a successful approval or reapproval process. And what that does is that the provost generally will make sure in communications with the deans and the programs, departments, and colleges that will be impacted by the CHIP process, that they are informed and that they are mobilized and ready to assist you in any way possible. That's a method that I found to be highly effective, because initially in starting the CHIP process, you're trying to reach out to the area of arts and sciences and your program faculty, departmental faculty, and it can be a bit disjointed until everyone pretty much knows the ramifications of how serious the process is, as indicated or communicated by the provost. So usually when the provost sends that email to the deans to make sure that everyone's engaged and involved in working with your school of education or college of education to secure a successful reapproval or program approval, you may have a few hiccups. Number two, who needs to be at the table? Well, first and foremost, your program faculty definitely need to be at the table. Why? Because they are the individuals that are versed and have the expertise in the areas that you're required to report on. These are the individuals that teach your methods courses, your pedagogy, they teach your curriculum courses, they supervise your internships. Therefore, it's critical that your program faculty be involved to provide expertise and guidance along the way. Second, I would definitely say your arts and science faculty need to be involved. Well, at different levels. For one, for the secondary education programs, we know that these are the content experts in the field, and they are the ones that, generally speaking, teach the content for the courses that are required for the CHIP. Well, when you get the arts and science faculty involved, it serves two purposes. First of all, it ensures that your content is properly aligned on the CHIP with the courses. And two, it allows that area to become aware of what the requirements are moving forward, to ensure that those requirements are embedded in the syllabus and that the information is actually being taught. We also would classify the arts and science people from an elementary standpoint as those individuals that teach your 4x12. Well, it's critical for those individuals to also know what's required in the CHIP process. And I found that you definitely have to sit down with the arts and science faculty, and it's a bit of a headache getting through that process, but it serves two purposes. Again, it satisfies your requirements for program approval, but two, it puts them on an even playing field in regards to knowing what the requirements are, what content is required to be covered, what your candidates will be assessed on, and that could be praxis, that could be GPA, whatever content knowledge assessments that you've implemented. It keeps everybody on the same sheet of music to make sure that you're not disjointed and not providing the adequate content knowledge that's needed to report on via your CHIPs. Another area that needs to be at the table is the area of assessment. These individuals should be there in order to assist you with creating your rubrics and aligning your rubrics from a descriptor standpoint, meaning in your rubrics, what constitutes your Likert 1 versus your Likert up to a 5. So a good assessment person is also essential to the process when you get to your key assessments. District partners are also a great entity to have at the table and should be at the table in regards to the CHIP as well as the CAPE process. They can assist you with getting more feedback and discussion on potential assignments that can be included to ensure best practices are occurring. They can assist you with alignment. They can assist you with helping develop key assessments. So those are some essential players that you definitely need to have at the table when working through this particular process. Definitely, I would also have departmental faculty involved in the process. Why? Because these individuals are the ones that teach particular courses that may be standard across all of your programs. However, each program has their own specific set of requirements related to satisfying the CHIP. For instance, your assessment course. Well, assessments will be different from elementary to secondary ed programs to special education programs. Your technology course, well, those standards may be quite different from one program to the next. So if these individuals are involved in the process, they are aware of the differences and the expectations that each individual program has, and they can be very beneficial in assisting you with aligning those things with assignments, with field experiences, as well as the key assessments. Number 3, how do you involve the arts and science faculty in the content knowledge? I think it's critical that you reach out to your arts and science faculty. What you don't want to do is make the mistake of assuming that individual indicators or standards are being met in content courses because that's where you think it should be covered. Certainly, when you reach out to the arts and science faculty, it ensures proper alignment with those subcategories for Praxis 2. It ensures that you're capturing data in the right places. For instance, if you're reporting on GPA as one of your content knowledge assessments. And number 3, it ensures that those arts and science faculty have an understanding of what's being required of the students in relationship to knowing that content. It also starts the discussion on assessments. When you know what internal assessments are being used by the arts and science faculty, well, it may lend itself to using one of their key assessments as one of your assessments identified in the CHIP. But at the lowest level, at least you've made communications with the arts and science faculty for nothing more than them knowing the requirements, for them assisting you with the alignment, and for them ensuring that the content is being covered in the actual course. Number 4, in what order did you approach the sections? Well, I found it most beneficial for me, certainly to begin with the curriculum aspect of the CHIP, because what that does is it sets the tone for developing the field experiences and the key assessments. As you know, in the CHIP, you have your indicators and the standards. Well, some of those are geared towards more demonstrating ability, where others are geared towards demonstrating knowledge of content. Well, from that, after you have aligned properly your course syllabi or courses with the proposed indicators and standards, then you can collectively group those particular indicators and standards and then look towards creating assignments that's geared towards capturing the data, if it's related to demonstrating or if it's related to content knowledge. So generally speaking, again, you want to start with your curriculum, or I found it most beneficial to start with the curriculum because it sets the tone for you knowing, no, we have to create an assignment or we have to strengthen an assignment now to be able to collect data on all of the indicators that are related to this particular standard. Then you move into your field experiences. Once you've created your assignments, it generally lends itself to what will be required in your field experience. Lastly, I think you develop the key assessment last because you've already at that point identified the curriculum components. You've already developed field experiences that are designed to give you or collect data that you're needing to satisfy a particular standard. And then you build your key assessments around those key indicator and standard terms that are embedded within the standard. Number 5, how did you keep the focus on the standards and indicators? Well, I think once you've established or properly aligned your curriculum and you've identified which particular indicators under a standard, for instance, lends themselves toward lesson planning. Let's just say I have 7 indicators under that particular standard. Well, for me, I want to make sure I'll align my assignments, my field experiences, and my key assessments to ensure that those same indicators are embedded in each one of those. Oftentimes, we just don't want to change substantially a course syllabi, but I found it's best sometimes to gut a course syllabi completely and start with only embedding the standards and indicators and building from that. So, you can have your different approaches to that, but clearly that helps me to stay focused on the standard and indicators when I can align all 3 or 4 of those pieces, and I'm counting based on the matrix, the number of indicators that are under the standard under the curriculum. Well, I'm making sure that I place those same indicators in that particular assignment, in that particular field assessment, if it's designed to capture data, or that particular key assessment as well. So you can cross-reference each element of that aspect. Again, there's some other critical components that you oftentimes want to embed in your core syllabi, but for program approval purposes, I found that you need to make sure that you're starting with the standards and indicators, and then everything else you can add after the fact. Number six, how did you make sure that your key assessments address the standards and indicators in the programs? Well, it's a little bit different from content knowledge, I think, to some of your other key assessments, but generally speaking, on your content knowledge, a good way to ensure that your key assessments are capturing the data is to triangulate the data. For instance, if you're using, which everybody's required to, Praxis 2, well, you look at the table of contents and you look at the alignment of Praxis 2 and the study guide and those different subcategories of what the test is designed to capture. And you triangulate that with the GPA, for instance, if you're doing a GPA analysis to capture content knowledge data. You've already indicated a specific course designed to capture particular sets of data, and you align that with the Praxis 2. So you cross-reference your Praxis 2 data with your GPA data, and kind of look at the correlation. So you're seeing an A grade in a particular course that's designed to capture data for a specific standard or indicators. And on the Praxis 2, clearly they tested very well in that particular category. Well, you want to say that that particular key assessment is capturing the data that you need, or assume that it is. On the other hand, some of the other key assessments, a good way to look at that is to simply make sure that your indicators are all embedded in your key assessment rubrics. I found that that's a good way to ensure that your key assessments are capturing the intended data. When you build those assignments and field experiences around data collection, ensure that when you are developing those rubrics, that your indicators are also embedded and tagged, because you want to make sure that they're tagged to the state standards. And by the way, it's a good idea to go ahead and tag those to the NTAS standards as well. That's a benefit for you for CIEP. You're not double dipping or backtracking on work at that particular point. But again, essentially, your key assessments are capturing the data if all of your indicators are embedded in the actual rubric that you've designed to capture the data. Now, I know that there's been a little bit different layout in regards to that, and now simply you have to demonstrate, I guess, enough for the standard to meet the standard, as opposed to all of the indicators meeting the standard. So you just have to consider, you just don't want a reviewer having to look at your particular assessments and they're guessing as to what.
I think Derek's last words in that were cut off were just, you don't want your reviewer trying to guess at what you meant to do, because as I mentioned before, we tell the reviewers that's not your job. Your job's the easy job, just to verify that what they've done is appropriate. Derek talked a lot in there about talking to a lot of people. He started with the provost. He talked about district partners, and that's something that's come up this semester a couple of times in conversations with institutions, that programs sometimes are now forming their own advisory groups for each program to help them with things like developing good content specific assessments and to look at the data with them and to say, well, how might we go about doing that? And Derek also talked about the curriculum is absolutely basic. When we have a situation where a standard has several conditions written underneath it, and we have to decide, well, what's the recommendation going to be? One of the biggest things to consider is, did they at least get the curriculum part right? That's so basic to everything else. That was a very key idea that he stressed too. The next slide is excuse me. The next slide is one that is from the sciences programs. And you can see that indicator up there. All the science programs have to address this indicator, and it's a huge one. You have to know about the concepts, principles, theories, laws, and interrelationships of their licensure area and the supporting fields, which are the other sciences areas and math. And we have had people look at that and say, how can you do that without listing absolutely everything that's on the checklist? And here's what we suggest that you do for that one. To make it a little bit more manageable, you can talk about what the minimum GPA is in the teaching field. Yours might be higher than the state minimum. You can talk about our checklists all require 3018 in the teaching field. Some institutions are holding to the academic major. You can put that in for that. And then you can just say, see the standards specific to this teaching field, because that's really what ultimately says whether that indicator is adequately addressed. For Alt-A programs, and this would apply not just to science, but to any program, to talk about Alt-A curriculum, you can look at what your institution and this program requires for admission. It can be praxis, it can be 3018, it can be the minimum GPA. You may have something higher than the state minimum. You may have specific prerequisite courses that you require, and if they haven't had them, they must have them. That can be very helpful. And then the teaching field of an alternative A program has to have at least a third of the hours in the teaching field itself. So you can say 12 to 15 graduate hours in the teaching field. If you are going to just list prerequisite courses in general, just to say that, they have to have had 30 hours in science or something like that, it's very hard to align those to specific indicators. On the other hand, it's very hard to say you must have these courses or take them. So what several institutions have done, and the University of South first came up with this, and we've seen it replicated a couple of times now, is to come up with some kind of an action research project to say, we really want to do a bit of a study to find out what are our candidates bringing to us for an Alt-A program? How can we compare that to what's on Praxis? And so will we be able to know in a few years what we should have for specific prerequisite courses? That would be database decision-making. And we have accepted that as key assessment number 2, content knowledge for Alt-A programs. After you've been doing it for a while, we're going to want to see, well, okay, now you've done that. What have you learned about that? What can you do with that? So I think our next slide is the parking lot. Okay. I'm going to have to pull up the chat here. What question?
The only questions that we've had thus far, Dr. Kozlowski, just is after the presentation, where can they view the information?
It's on our website under, you have to go to the educator preparation section and look under program review information, and it will be posted there. And because it's publicly available information, if anyone sends me an email, I will send them the link if you're having a hard time finding it. We're always very careful to work through appropriate channels, but for publicly available information, I can answer that. Any other challenges? I want to give you a minute or two to ask questions about curriculum or what you have found to be difficult. Put the link in the chat. Yes, we are getting used to technology. I can do that while the next video plays. Any other curriculum questions? One of the things that we tell the summer teams is if you see something that makes you say, wow, tell us. And that's where we've always gotten a lot of our examples. When someone has come up with a great idea, we're now, we've always asked them to share, but this is one that came to us that way, where reviewers said, you all need to look at this. Last year in the workshops that we were able to do in person, there'd been some discussion about how the requirement that field experiences use technology for instruction and assessment and management was really challenging some ways. And I want you all to see what Judson came up with. This is, I believe in hockey, it would be a hat trick. They did all three in one assignment. And as I understand it, they did this before the virtual age. So let's see what they have. And the handout, the link is there too.
Hello, everyone. I'm Leslie Sheik from Judson College, just talking with you today about the field experience assignment that we have in EDU 314, Behavioral and Classroom Management. This is called our Google Project assignment. 314 falls at block 4 out of 6 of field experiences. The 6th block is clinical practice. So this course generally has students in their junior year. They're enrolled in a variety of education courses, and at least one of those is a methods course where students are teaching and assigning projects to those K through 12 grade students. Since classroom management is focused not only on behavior, but also on grading, on managing materials, we feel like this is a good assignment to help our candidates understand how to navigate this process. And we do call this the Google Classroom Project. The first step is just to become acquainted with Google Classroom. Many of our cooperating teachers are using this platform. However, our candidates could be in a school where they're using Schoology or some other platform. In that case, step 1 would just be to complete some training. Step 2 of the assignment is for the teacher candidates to create their own Google Classroom teacher page. And this could be something that they would actually use in their real classrooms. They might want to include a Bitmoji or a photograph of themselves. They just want to customize this page, make it attractive and inviting to the students. At step 3, they'll work with their cooperating teacher to identify a minimum of 4 of their classroom students to become enrolled in this Google Classroom. And then they'll start adding projects and assignments to the Google Classroom. The first is a getting to know you assignment. We want our candidates to build community with their students, so this is a good way to kick that off. They'll also create a Google Doc where multiple students will contribute to that one item. This helps with collaboration, but it also helps prepare our teacher candidates for PLCs in the world that they're about to enter in as a professional. And then they've got to create some due dates for their students so they understand how the Google Docs or the Google Classroom works. And they'll also post an individual assessment assignment for individual students to complete. So they kind of see a well-rounded idea of what they're capable of providing through the Google Classroom. And then the final piece of the assignment is for them to reflect on their growth, reflect on the tool, reflect on how it worked with students, what they would change in the future, what they learned from this experience. And it is scored on a rubric here back at Judson by the faculty. We just collaborate to look over what the students have completed. So I hope this was helpful if you're thinking about incorporating technology and an assessment to help with classroom management. We think this is a good project.
Thank you. I was so excited when someone brought that to our attention because I thought it really showed how you could do everything in just one field experience. And I just had never seen it done that way before. Let's see. Another area where we saw a lot of strengths and field experiences was at Huntington College. They have a physical education professor, Michelle Martin, who has worked with an assistive technology project. And some of you might remember, oh, it's probably 4 or 5 years ago now, we had used some Huntington documentation of field experiences too. So it seems to be a real strength there across some of the programs. So let's see what Michelle has to tell us about assistive technology and how she was able to use that. I think this was with a collaborative K-6 program.
Hello, my name is Dr. Michelle Martin, and I'm going to be talking about creating field experiences aligned to standards, an assistive technology project that I created. Hello. The first step is brainstorming. What is it that you want to teach? What standards need to be addressed? And how can you combine the two together? So first thing you need to do is identify which standards you want to be addressed. So I have assistive technology project that my students work on, and so this particular standard, CEC standard 5.3, which specifically talks about assistive technology, I thought would be a great standard to use in my project. Collaboration is key within special education. So I wanted to make sure that I had a project that was going to be really field-based for the teachers and the students together along with their students. And then it's all about blending the two together, collaboration and your standard. So I wanted to create a project that not only involved my student, my teacher candidate, but also their CT, and as well as various members of the IEP team, such as the students, gen ed, and the parents be involved. The next step is creating a field-based project. Look for key words that are in your standard. So for my standard that I chose that went with this project, keywords such as familiar, support, and variety were important to me. Familiar, so that way students can actually experiment and know what certain ATs are. A variety, so that way they had to decide and use different types of. And support. How can this be useful specifically for a certain student? Then you're going to decide how you can use those keywords within the field project. So for example, the college instructor versus the cooperating teacher. I wanted to make sure that I was able to create a project where both myself and the CT would be able to accurately and efficiently grade the student on their AT project. As well, I wanted the teacher candidate to work with the student. They needed to use the student's IEP for background information. They needed to figure out how they wanted to create this project based upon the student's needs. So they would have to know how to collect data. Lastly, create ways to collaborate. How can you come up with ideas that can work for both you, the CT, and the teacher candidate collaboratively to have this project be successful? So always thinking back to your standard or standards that you're planning on using. And here's my standard again with my key terminology bolded. So as I'm thinking about my key terminology and working on this project, I wanted teacher candidates to experiment with AT with the student. So they had to become familiar using a variety in order to support the communication of their students. So they had to work with their students, had to experiment with different varieties of assistive technology to find the right one that would work, and maybe had to use it several times so it worked appropriately. Always remember to use your cooperating teachers as a resource. I wanted this project to be, again, something that would be supportive for my students and collaborative. So I decided to have as the assessment portion of this project, both the CT and myself grading separate sections of AT. When it came to assessing this project and specifically using this standard, I wanted to make sure that both the CT and myself were able to do that. However, I'm not always in the field when the student is going to be using the specific AT device. The CT is. So that is how I got the CT involved with the assessment portion of this project. The CT was the one that was going to be able to determine if the device was appropriately used, if the device was put together appropriately and it worked, that it worked for a specific student, that data was collected in order to create the project, that it was clearly explained, that the teacher candidate explained to the student how the AT worked and what the purpose of it was, as well as that the teacher candidate talked to other members of the IEP team and explained to them how the AT was to work. So this became a collaborative project for everybody. As far as myself, I would do the paper portion where they would go through and talk about how receptive was the student to AT? Did they have any issues creating it? How did the data portion work? Did that help them decide what types of AT would be appropriate and to try? As well as other things such as organization style, paper requirements, and conventions. So both the CT and I are able to see this standard being implemented. So in summary, this is how I incorporated my standard within my field experience. First, I brainstormed my ideas, decided what I would like to do. Then I decided which standards I would incorporate into my project. Look for those key words or key terminology within those standards, and then make an action plan for those keywords. Lastly, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Our CTs are super important to us, and they're the best way that we can ensure that our students are going to get the most from their field experiences. It is a surefire way for us to make sure that we can have our field experience blend in with our standards.
I don't think I realized last week when I watched this video and the first time that I watched it, that this is another one that really hits on all three areas, because collaborating with others to address the needs of a particular student, that's managing the learning of the student. We have always defined classroom or using technology for management as broadly as possible. So I think that clearly could be made here. She mentioned collecting data, so there's an assessment going on there. And if you're teaching the student a skill or how to use assistive technology, then that one would hit instruction too. So that's one thing that could hit all three areas. So to me, that's really impressive that someone can think about that. I think she was also talking about the importance of collaboration and the partnerships. Just a really impressive one. Let's see. Our next presenter is Dr. Angela Stewart. And she's presenting work on behalf of the entire elementary education program. And I think one of the things that really jumped out at me about these is you can tell these are things that were not developed in a semester. They've really been working on high quality field experiences throughout for several years to get to this level. So let's hear from Dr. Stewart, and that handout is available. Amanda's putting where it is on the website.
Spring Hill College Field Experience in Elementary Education. During the sophomore year, we have 4 200 level courses. During these 2 semesters for their sophomore year, they will have a similar 18-hour lab experience during a 3-week time frame that usually falls during the middle of the semester. The focus for sophomores really starts increasing in the planning, teaching, and assessment part, as well as more interaction with students. The lab assignments include opportunities to teach in front of the students, to work one-on-one with students, to really start getting to know the needs of the learners in that classroom. The teachers do provide the students with assessment feedback, as well as to the college supervisor. During the 2 junior block semesters, students really start focusing more on the assessment component that goes along with planning and teaching. They have 2 18-hour back-to-back semesters that focus intently on collaborative planning with their cooperating teacher. And not only do they just focus on the daily lesson plans, but really focus on differentiation for diverse learners and how to adapt to the learning that's taking place in the classroom. The lab experience this time increases to 3 consecutive full weeks of experience for each semester in a diverse school setting that could include private, public, and Title I schools. And we try to include a different grade level than we have previously in their sophomore and freshman years. And during this time, we have the increase of assessment, and we have what we call critical assignments that are integrated into the lab experience that help prepare our teachers for EdTPA. Also, the increase of focus on reteaching and assessment as students use this data to make decisions for adaptation of lesson planning and teaching. During the internships, our interns are placed in internship according to previous diverse settings and grade levels, spans, as well as their preference. The interns participate in a 3-hour EdTPA course, as well as internship for a total of 12 credit hours. The interns are assessed on ACT standards and CHIP standards through self-evaluation, cooperating teacher, and college supervisor assessments. Students complete 20 days of teaching that include full planning, teaching, and assessment for all students, all subjects.
One of the amazing things about the Spring Hill, when if you look at, I think they gave you quite a bit of it, maybe all of their field experiences, not just elementary, but it was how clearly they develop over time. That was really a strength of the Spring Hill, and the quality and the rigor of what they were doing that stood out. One of the things that I think we've seen in a couple of the presentations is you'll see people giving us rubrics or however they assess students. That's not required for field experiences, but if it's there, it can certainly be part of the evidence. The idea with the giving just the assignments for field experiences, you don't have to grade absolutely everything and collect numbers on absolutely everything. That's why we eliminated that. And we want a lot of flexibility with your field experiences as you go forward. One thing that we had started talking about last year at a workshop was that we see a lot of field experiences are based on help the struggling reader. And that's a good thing, or help the struggling learner in whatever area. But Amanda and I were talking one day about where do we do something for the higher level? We mentioned that at a workshop, and Shirley Farrell and Dr. Hurst here at the State Department came up with a brief presentation for us all on things that you might have people do with gifted students, because gifted students are everywhere. Gifted students do have unique needs, but sometimes you can get ideas that can be used anywhere. As a secondary history teacher, I love what they had about the ways of thinking icons, and you just can't help but think, well, what could I do with that in a classroom? So let's learn some more about gifted students.
Hi, we wanted to share some information, a population within diverse learners, and that's your gifted students. So if we think about students with disabilities, and that's on the left side of the bell curve, we know within that red area, these students are identified and they need additional services to help support them. However, if we look to the other side, logically, then that same area on the right side of the bell curve is going to need additional supports. Those are your gifted kids. And yes, they do need additional supports. So just like the students with disabilities, it's about 5 to 10% of the population. So a lot of times we believe what we think gifted is, when that is just a preconceived idea and not the real world of gifted. So gifted students are not the teacher pleaser, the class leader, motivated, love school, ask the teacher, what else can you give me? What else can I do? That our students may be very domain specific, only looking at being gifted in math and being below benchmark in reading. They can still be gifted. They can be twice exceptional, have a disability and be gifted. The asynchronous development, having uneven development, they're not pretty much level in all areas, with even social emotional and things like that, that it's very uneven and it's confusing to the kids, to the parents, and to teachers. Our gifted kids underachieve and can be the biggest behavior problem in your classroom. A lot of times we say we teach to the middle, and we're pulling up those to get them up benchmark, and we think the kids that are at benchmark and above, especially our gifted above, that they're okay on their own. And yet when we teach to the middle, this is, look all the way to the right, those are the gifted kids pretty much flat out on the floor. And what this does is foster underachievement. Or when you give them more of the same thing, do what everyone else is doing. And when you finish, because you finish quickly, I'm going to give you another math worksheet of 25 problems. You're going to shut that gifted kid down. They don't see the relevance of it because they already know it. And you're fostering, you being the school system, fostering underachievement. So gifted education is a right and not a privilege. We have to accommodate for, and this is in the code for Alabama, these special needs of gifted students. We have to increase complexity, have greater depth, and this is in their areas of giftedness, a faster pacing. We have to develop that creative potential and look at that affective domain. So this is usually what happens. And even though this is English language arts, substitute any subject in here. And this is what happens to our gifted kids. They're working way up here, but now we got to pull them all the way back down.
And so just like Shirley said, we have to accommodate for those gifted students' needs. And so differentiation is a great way to include strategies for those students to meet their needs where they're at. And so you'll see lots of different strategies here, grouping strategies, acceleration options for middle and high school, and then a list of differentiation strategies. And so I have a few of those highlighted: pre-assessment, compacting with learning contracts, and independent study. So the teacher can pre-assess all students and see where students fall, and maybe they have mastered a majority of the content that's going to be covered in that unit. And so the gifted students can then compact out of all of that content that they've mastered. And learning contracts can be a way to manage that compacting. So the teacher and the student go into this learning contract, and so the student knows what their expectations are, how they're going to learn, what they're going to do, how they're going to share that information. And then they may also do independent study projects where they go deeper into area of interest or subject that kind of correlates with maybe the unit that they're in at the time. And so you can see some of these strategies presented on the ALSD YouTube channel, and that link will be available to you there. And you can see how to implement these different differentiation strategies. We also want to encourage teachers to use different questioning strategies, and depth and complexity is one that is really great to use. It gets students to move toward that expert thinking, gets them thinking like the disciplinarian. There are 11 icons. You're not teaching the icons, but you just want those to trigger how the student is going to think. And so there are 11 icons, and then there's content imperatives, which you see across the bottom in black and white. And so I encourage you to explore those and find out more about how to implement those with students. And then we want the interns and pre-service teachers to consult with the gifted specialists at the school to find out what are the best strategies that will work for the gifted students. Also using other resources in the building, like your special education teacher and your EL teacher for students who might be dual identified or English language learners. So really connecting with all the resources in the building to provide the best strategies for those students. We've also provided here some state and national resources, state organizations and national organizations, where you can find a wealth of information regarding gifted students, things to share with parents. So we encourage you to check those out as well, and those will be on a handout that's provided to you as well. So we hope this has been helpful and that you can use some of the ideas that we've shared with you.
One of the things that they put in there, and we did not ask them to particularly talk about professionalism, just about gifted. They talked about having candidates talk with the special ed teacher, the ELL teacher, the gifted teacher. One of the places we see people struggling a lot are the standards to do with professionalism. I think working in field experiences to talk to people like that could certainly be a way to address professionalism. I guess that idea of a collaboration is so critical, and it's not just one person in one classroom teaching, it's everyone working together to support all the children. One of the things that we have done since the beginning of CHIP is to ask questions and get people's input and to say, how do you think this will work? Well, we're going to have one of those moments right now. We do have some proposed changes to our field experience rubric. For those of you who are getting ready to submit this summer, don't panic. These are not substantive changes. We're really going after clarity, and we'll ask our reviewers to have the same expectations that they've always had. But can we get you to look at that handout number 3 on our website? And we'll give you a few minutes to look at it. It'll be much easier to read in the handout. And what do you think about those changes? You can put your comments or your questions, your concerns or your complaints right into the chat box. If you scroll up in the chat box, you'll see the link on our website to where the handouts are. Let me see if I can just. I'm still struggling with what wait time is in the virtual world. Do you all need a few more minutes?
Dr. Kozlowski, we have one question that just says, comment that says it looks more streamlined. Was that the goal?
I think that was a big part of it, just to be clearer on what the expectations are, make it easier to see what is in there, what's not in there, make it easier for people to know what to put in the present, in that section 4 chart, as well as what's in the documents. I think with CHIP, we have always struggled. We wanted to have a framework to think about your programs, but we didn't want to tell you what to do in your programs. And I have said from the beginning that I really believed as we worked together and we shared together, we would make progress. And I think that's been happening when you saw some of the field experiences that have been shared. Okay, if you want to take a look at that later or send questions or comments in, that's fine. And we'll let people know when changes are finalized. We'll do something similar with the key assessment rubric. Yep, I like that. The basic principles remain throughout. I think sometimes we have a lot of conversations with people throughout the course of the year. And we just try to make note of things where people struggle. We'll look back at it. I think sometimes with experience, it gets easier to write a better rubric. I've never found the perfect rubric, but you get started somewhere and you keep improving. We did have some questions about, we had no idea where we would be in a virtual world now. Is it easier now for all of you to use technology for instruction, management, and assessment online because of the virtual world? Are we on track with what we should require for technology? And how have you all found that your field experiences are changing? I think there's a way to raise your hand or let us know if you'd like to speak, if that's easier than typing. I'm going to assume we're doing okay with the field experiences rubric if there's not a lot of need for discussion. We're starting to get deeper into the traditional Class A programs that fall under CHIP: school counseling, library media, sport management, instructional leadership, ESOL gifted. One of the things to remember about traditional Class A programs is they have the option. Instructional leadership's a little bit different, but the traditional Class A programs have the option of embedding field experiences throughout the program, rather than just at the end of the program like you would have in a Class B program. And if you do that, just make very clear to reviewers that these are it's called the internship, but it's the field experiences throughout the program too, so that we know for sure what it is. One program almost had one condition based on this, and then we realized that's what they had done. It was a library media program. They had 3 distinct internships. One dealt with the instructional part of being a librarian. Another part dealt with collections and management of the budget, things like that. And the other one, I think, dealt with maybe collaboration with faculty and others. And they called it internship A, B, and C instead of field experiences. And then they had a couple of field experiences that were just, okay, but the internship parts were fine. But they ended up being all met once we realized, oh, that's what they did. So make sure you just label that clearly. I think we have some comments there, Amanda.
Just the one from the question that you
Okay.
that we posed earlier. And they were saying that they're using Zoom, Google Classroom, talks with cooperating teachers to gain a wider perspective of methods, practicum, and intern students.
Sounds like that's working well in this most unusual of times that we're all in.
And Donaldson Williams says, we had no choice in the matter. We were pushed out in the deep and were forced to stay alive and relevant. Now technology has become a major component of our teaching culture. And he is correct.
He's absolutely correct on that. I know that we would not have been doing this if we had a choice. And I'm so glad we were forced to do it, because I think it makes us more accessible when we can get together by Zoom rather than just a conference call, and we can share documents back and forth. But yeah, we were forced, but there's going to be a lot of good that comes out of it. Any other questions about field experiences? Comments? Okay. We have a presentation next from Dr. Janet Bavanese, the interim dean now at Jacksonville. She had done a lot in her own program. She worked with I think still does work with the Class A reading specialist program. And her submission was really her work and her colleagues' work. It wasn't just standards that were forced into documents and indicators that were plugged in here and there. It really, if you know Janet, it had sparkle and shine to it. So let's see what she has to say about how she really got involved with the CHIP process.
Hello, my name is Dr. Janet Bavanese, and I'm the interim dean at Jacksonville State University School of Education. I'm also the chair of the Jacksonville State University Reading Specialist Program, and I wanted to come this morning to talk to you a little bit. Hello, my name is Dr. Janet Bavanese, and I'm interim dean of the School of Education at Jacksonville State University. I also serve as the program chair for the Reading Specialist Program, and I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about the CHIP process. So I want to just let you know that when I first started looking at CHIP, I was very overwhelmed, and I thought, gosh, this is so much to do. There's 5 key assessments. You have to have all of the things about the field experiences. You have to list descriptions for all of the courses that you have in a program. And it felt very overwhelming. But then I thought about it, and I thought deeply, and I began to understand that CHIP is really all about just improving your program. I started out by thinking about what my program, Reading Specialist Program, which, as you know, is an advanced program that prepares candidates that have prior teaching experience at the master's level to become reading specialists in their P12 settings. So I started thinking about what I really wanted my candidates to come out of the program with. And once I started thinking about that, I was able to go back to the 5 key assessments and sort of chisel down to what I wanted each of those key assessments to yield for me in looking at the candidate performance, so that I could then figure out what we were strong in, what we were more challenged by, and I could make those adjustments to improve the program, ultimately improving my candidate performance, and then ultimately improving P12 student learning. So I started out by looking at my courses and writing course descriptions that accurately portrayed what the content was. So when you look at your CHIP, you have all of your standards, and you're supposed to map your courses to the standards to show how the standards are portrayed in the courses, where that content is, and also the order in which courses are taken plays into that as well. So content should build across a program, across the different courses, and you should have kind of an even layout of the standards. So you don't want all the standards in one course and only one standard in another course. So it helps to kind of look at that and envision it. And again, thinking about, what do I want my candidates to learn and be able to come out of this being able to do at the end of the program. So I mapped the courses, the content to the courses, and then I started looking at the key assessments. So once I got the courses mapped, I went to key assessment 1, which is praxis. I found out some very interesting things when I started to drill down in that data. First of all, reading specialists in my program always have a high rate of success on the reading specialist praxis. So that's a high pass rate, right? But when you really start drilling down into those subcategories, I found out, hey, we're super strong in foundational knowledge, but we're kind of medium, if you will, in professional learning and leadership. So that made me go back to my courses that I had just course mapped and take a look to see, hey, where am I covering this literacy leadership, and where does that take place in the program? And how am I advising my candidates to go take the praxis? So I made some quick adjustments there. I moved around some content a little bit to make the literacy, learning, and leadership content more accessible to candidates. And then I also went back and tweaked where I advised them to take the praxis. So that was one thing that immediately came out of the CHIP process. And again, keeping in mind, this is not just a report I'm doing. I'm actually trying to improve my candidate knowledge and performance when they are finished with the program. After that, I started looking at how I wanted to measure content knowledge. So key assessment 2 is all about content knowledge. So every program has content standards. So whether you're preparing candidates at the initial licensure level, or whether you're preparing candidates at the advanced licensure level, like reading specialists, you have to have a way to measure the actual content knowledge of the candidates. So again, thinking about reading specialists, these are people that are already certified. These are people that are likely teaching already in schools. So I knew that I wanted to make content knowledge very project based. So I wanted reading specialist candidates to have projects and ways that they could take the content knowledge they're learning and immediately try to apply it into the P12 setting where they were teaching, or where they had a placement for their practicum or internship. So what resulted out of this is a 2-semester portfolio, and candidates work on 12 different projects. So there's 6 main categories of standards in reading specialist. So each of those 6 standards have 2 projects. So candidates work on these projects throughout these 2 semesters, and at the end, they have a portfolio or a real good defined body of work that really shows how they were able to take the content knowledge, align it to the standards, and apply it to the real work of being a reading specialist out in our P12 schools. So that was my key assessment too. And I just love that because it makes the work meaningful for the candidates. So I'm still able to see, you know, what their content knowledge is, and yet they're out doing work, actually standing in the shoes, if you will, of a reading specialist while they're doing it, applying what they've learned in the classes. And that's my key assessment too. So for key assessment 3 is planning. So I started thinking about that, and I thought, you know, when we talk about planning and we talk about reading specialists, these are people that already are certified. They are out teaching in schools for the most part, and they have at least 2 full years of full-time experience in the classroom. So planning needs to take on a higher level approach. So I started thinking about aligning the reading specialist standards to a reading specialist lesson plan. This lesson plan goes far beyond just what a regular classroom teacher would have as a lesson plan, because a reading specialist needs to take into account not only their own teaching ability and reflection and ability to impact student learning, but reading specialists often are tasked with coaching and helping other teachers to get to those higher levels of performance. So the reading specialist lesson plan had to have elements that not only addressed what the candidate could do themselves in teaching and learning, but also how they could help others to get there. So I designed a lesson plan, aligned it to the standards, and then I placed this going back to my course descriptions and going back to my matriculation through the program. I went back and I placed it in 4 different courses. So over the course of 4 courses in the Reading Specialist program, candidates practice this planning at a higher level using 3 to 5 day learning segments aligned to the Reading Specialist standards, and they have 49 opportunities to show their proficiency in lesson planning. So you might be thinking 49 opportunities, oh my goodness. Well, if you think about it this way, what do you want candidates to come out with at the end? Remember in the beginning of the video, I said that when I first looked at CIEP, I thought, well, this is just a lot to do. But then I started wrapping my head around, hey, this is a way for me to really look at the outcomes of the program on the candidate learning and then eventually on P12 learning and teacher learning out in the school. So I want a lot of opportunities for people to show what they can do. So 49 opportunities across 4 classes. And the beauty of this is that I can look early in the program, I can collect this data early in the program, and I can tell, hey, you know, you're challenged by looking at the literate environment, how to create that, or maybe you're challenged by how to use foundational knowledge to improve student learning. But I can help the candidates from early on look at these different standards. I can help them understand where they're performing strongly and where they need to improve. And over time, over these 49 opportunities, they have ample time to take into account the feedback, to peer with one another. I built some peer review work in there. And then by the time they get to the end of the program, I have a pretty good picture of how they've progressed all the way through. And I can use that particular data that I'm reporting for CIEP, I can use that to improve my program. So if I start to identify trends early on, they're struggling with, you know, this particular thing, or later they're still struggling with this particular thing, or they're really strong on this here, I can use that data then to make further adjustments in the program. And then again, those adjustments then impact reading specialist learning, which then impact teacher learning and P12 learning out in our schools. So, you know, looking at the CAPE, the CHIP process, not CAPE, just got through with some CAPE stuff, but looking at the CHIP process really helps you to drill down and think about the outcomes of your program. So again, going back to the beginning, if you look at CHIP and you think about you know, oh, this is so much to do. I have to do these 5 key assessments and write all of this stuff and these narratives and provide everything. If you look at it like that, it will be a chore. But if you look at it like, hey, what am I doing to impact the learning of my students at the college, at the university level, and how are my students then going to impact P12 student learning out in the schools, and in my case, teacher learning out in the schools, it makes it easier to negotiate the different key assessments and how you're going to fine tune and look at what your program can do based on the data. So again, I just wanted to give you a small little a little talk about this, or a little think aloud really about what we did. So if you have questions about CHIP, I have found that addressing them to the state staff is very helpful. They, you know, answer back. They're very helpful in giving guidance, or if you're just not sure. It's also helpful to reach out to partner institutions to peer with one another. So feel free to reach out to any of us here at JSU, or some of your other colleagues. I find that talking things out, or just really having someone else to sound something on, is helpful. We did that here at JSU, even among our different programs. So we exchanged our CHIP reports. We helped each other read and review things. We asked each other pertinent questions. You know, what did you mean here? Or is this enough times that you're going to assess something there? And we had very good outcomes on our CHIP processes. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and good luck.
With Janet's presentation, you know, when she was talking about having a key assessment number 2 that's based on field experiences, if those field experiences are embedded and that had come in as an internship assessment, that probably would have been just fine too. But it was that the way she was able to talk about how she uses the standards and the indicators in the CHIP process to make sure her program is as good as it can possibly be is really what the whole CHIP process is about. She also mentioned calling the State Department for guidance. People are always welcome working through the appropriate channels at your institution to say, hey, Anna or Amanda or both of you, can you look at something with this? Or we have an idea, we just want to get some feedback before we go too far down that rabbit hole, to make sure that will work. And sometimes in those conversations, people are really direct with us and they'll say that won't work. Okay, well, tell us why it won't work. Well, let's see what else we can come up with. And then as we get good ideas from other institutions, we're able to say to more institutions, well, have you thought about that? And it's not because we're smart. It's because people are doing such good work out there, and we're able to share it in those conversations. You know, we get these opportunities once a year to share voices and experiences, but when you talk to us one-on-one, you're really hearing a lot from others in the state about how to approach CHIP or approach a particular part of CHIP. When it comes to the next part of this workshop, we'll talk about key assessments. And we still have folks who struggle sometimes thinking about, well, okay, I have which key assessments and what do I put where to see if it makes sense. And you have to think hard about that sometimes. And it depends on the standard set that you're working with. Some standards like math and science are very clear on, here's the content part, this is the content. And so you're pretty clear on, I use Praxis content assessment and probably 2 GPA to get 2 content knowledge using based on a GPA to get that done. Some do address both content and pedagogy. Pedagogy standards usually involve key assessment 3, planning instruction, 4, internship, 5, impact on student learning, and whatever else you may have added to that. But not everything in 3, 4, and 5 has to be used for everything. And sometimes you'd have something that's used, but it's not, it provides some evidence. For example, in an internship assessment, you probably have a couple of items that deal with content knowledge. Do they know the content they're teaching? And that's just a general statement. Do they know the content? Yes or no? Or to what extent? That's important, but it doesn't really let you know what content knowledge they know. So yes, you can add it to some things. If it talks about content knowledge in general, like that big science indicator that we looked at earlier. But if it talks about a very specific science concept, knows cellular structure, well, you don't know that they taught cellular structure. Maybe they're a general science teacher who's teaching chemistry and physics in their internship. So you have to think carefully about how you want to use that. Some are pretty easy to look at. Our next slide are based on the social studies standards. And it's pretty clear which ones are praxis, which ones are other areas. EdTPA, I missed that when I was talking about pedagogy ones. Certainly EdTPA is very good for some things, but it doesn't address specific methods of teaching. So that would not be sufficient for others. But sometimes just looking quickly overall at the standards and saying, well, generally, what would I put where can be very helpful. We have a couple of comments to share with you about key assessments 1A and 1B. One of the things we most frequently cite is that we get data tables that are printouts from ETS or Pearson about here are the results. We really need those to be aligned to standards and indicators. And a big part of that is to make sure that the faculty are really looking at how are things aligned to standards and indicators. We've also had a couple times the glitches when we've had to figure things out during a review. If you have combined programs such as elementary K-6 and collaborative K-6, they do not do both of the EdTPAs, they do one of the EdTPAs. So you want to make sure that you explain that. The EdTPA score should, even if it's just from one handbook, should be put in both. So reviewers get a better sense of what their skills are. The data from B and Alt-A programs have to be reported separately. I know that ETS the data reports are not the friendliest for pulling that information, but we do need them reported separately, primarily because what decisions you make about continuous improvement would be different for B and Alt-A programs, particularly for praxis tests. So that data does have to be separate. And I know in the past we might have missed that, but just make sure the next time that you submit that we get that clear in how we're doing that. Are there any questions about key assessments number 1, your praxis tests and EdTPA? People have been
about key assessments in general.
Sure.
I've heard from several different people and on some cases that if a student fails the key assessment, they could fail the course. And I just want clarity on that.
That would be an institutional decision.
Okay, thank you.
We like easy answers like that. Thank you for an easy question.
I have another question that's kind of off topic. That's a question.
Why don't you throw it out now and we'll see if we can answer it.
Okay, so the CHIP standards, the old standards versus the new standards, if we haven't had our site visit yet, if we become aware of new standards or new expectations, could we shift to those new expectations before the site visit?
Work with your leadership on that to work with the person here who's assigned to your institution to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Okay.
Because
okay, thank you.
if I gave you some general answers right now, I think I would just cause general confusion.
May I ask a quick question?
That helps.
A question?
Sure.
Yes. You said that just placing the tables from ETS or EdTPA is not desirable. What recommendation do you make in terms of adjustment to those tables?
We had an example last year of some praxis tests and how that could be done.
Okay.
It
From last-
generally by the sub-scores, and you align
Okay.
the sub-score categories to the standards and
Yeah.
indicators in the
Yes.
document. Smaller programs have to combine data over several years to try to reach that minimum N of 10, but we've explained that in last year's videos. And the biggest thing I can say is make sure that you keep the key assessment rubric in front of you as you're working on things. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go on to, oh, I'm sorry, do we still report all standardized tests at the sub-score level? Yes, all assessments have to be based on sub-scores. And think of it this way, if someone tells you you have a 3, a C level knowledge and content knowledge, you don't know where to begin to fix things. But if they tell you you have an A in economics, an A in government, a C in history, and a D in geography, you at least know where to start looking to get it to improve things. One of the comments we got every year was, you talk too much about the Class B programs. You don't always give us examples from different areas. So we have tried to put more examples in. Here's another one from a Class AA teacher leader program at the University of North Alabama. I think in the handout, you can see how they were thinking about how to really get their teachers involved in being teacher leaders. And collecting the data that would be important for being a teacher leader. And the Dr. Jeff Cornelius and Dr. Chris James were the ones who'd really developed this assessment. And they had Dr. Lori Johnson do the presentation for them because they just had so many things going on the week we needed them. So let's see what they have to tell us about how they approached bringing the standards and indicators to life.
Hi, this is Lori Johnson, the Director of Continuous Improvement and Accreditation at the University of North Alabama. And today I'm going to share with you our Teacher Leader Program Portfolio, one of our CHIP key assessments. This portfolio was created by Dr. Chris James, the Director of Teacher Education, and Dr. Jeff Cornelius, the Department Chair for Teaching, Learning, and Leadership at the University of North Alabama, in collaboration with teacher leader program faculty and P12 partners in the field, local school and district level administrators. We collect our program data in our online assessment management system called TK20. So on my screen, you see our TK20 system and how the portfolio assessment appears in that system for the person assessing it. In order to develop a program portfolio, the faculty of the Teacher Leader Program, in collaboration with partners from the field, identified 6 skill areas or themes related to the Teacher Leader standards. These areas are listed on tabs or sections within the portfolio, and you can see those here at the top. These areas include teacher leader, leadership, research, professional learning, student learning, data and assessments, equitable practice, and advocate for the profession. Under each skill or theme area, candidates are directed to upload a specific activity from coursework completed in the program. So for example, under teacher leader, candidates will upload a teacher leadership philosophy. You can see that here. And under research, candidates will upload digital presentations from their capstone research projects. Each of the rubrics are aligned down to the indicator level of the teacher leader standards. Candidates can score at the effective, developing, or ineffective levels, and we've provided generic definitions of each level on the description page. And you can see that here. The description page also includes for candidates the purpose of the assessment, the directions, how it will be scored, success criterion, and how it will be administered. This is our largest assessment for this program. It is aligned to multiple indicators, but not all of them. We have additional assessments that assess other CHIP indicators. There is specific language provided within the scoring rubric related to each indicator. So for a specific example, let's take a look at equitable practice. Under this area, students upload a diversity strategic vision plan from EDS 704, a class called Culturally Proficient Leadership. To complete this assignment, students must complete a multicultural audit focused on curricular and extracurricular areas. Multiple stakeholder groups are engaged and policies are reviewed to gather data regarding the availability of resources for diverse student populations. After gathering appropriate data, students develop a plan that summarizes the process, analyzes and presents findings, and offers recommendations for improvement. And you can see here, this is section 7, equitable practice. And you can see the different indicators and scoring levels. In the scoring rubric, we are interested in obtaining data from this assignment in 3 areas aligned at the indicator level to obtain data for program improvement. Within the course, the professor may choose to include more than what is on the portfolio rubric, but the faculty understands that only this portion of the rubric, which has been validated using the Lashy method, will be assessed at the program level, and only what's on this rubric is reported for continuous improvement at the program level. They are stakeholder feedback demonstrating an ability to understand and appreciate multiple perspectives, explain findings and demonstrate an understanding of biases, the ability to offer recommendations. If you have any additional questions about this portfolio, we are more than happy to provide more information to you. If you would, contact Dr. Chris James at cljames@una.edu.
I hope you had a chance to look at their portfolio assignment requirements, because it really shows how they have brought things to life in there. One thing Lori mentioned that I think they did for CAPE purposes was to use a Lashy method on that. That is a CAPE thing. We do not require it for CHIP. So we do see sometimes that people have done program specific Lashys. That's terrific. We don't want to stop you if you want to do it. It's just not required. I mentioned a little bit earlier about the challenges that some of the Alt-A programs have in identifying content-specific indicators and how to go about doing it. And you can set up a study to look at it. You can say if they're admitted on praxis, maybe does the candidate have category scores that are at the state or national level, if you can get that information depending on your numbers. You can look at the teaching field and maybe say which undergraduate courses are most critical. Have some experts look at that and use those to say, well, you have to have these courses, and we're going to look at the grades from that for our key assessment, no matter where you took it. But you would have to be very clear on what those courses were. Maybe we need to see that they have a course in microbiology for a chemistry program. You can do that study to say, well, what do they have when they come to us? There are people who go into Alt-A programs for all kinds of reasons and have all kinds of backgrounds. So what are they bringing to the program? Praxis is one measure. You can admit them based on that, regardless of their prior work. Coursework GPA is different, but you don't have to look for specific coursework. But maybe you should look for some things that they have. If you use something like grades, prior coursework for an Alt-A program, you have to give us your screening sheet for it. so that we can see that, okay, this is what they're looking for. And it would need to be as specific as, well, these are the 5 math courses they should have for a math program. Let's see, I said see handout 4A. I'm drawing a blank at the moment of what 4A is. Oh, this is Dr. Almori's other part. This is something that's different that I really liked. Because of the challenges sometimes at looking at prior coursework for all days, they came up with a capstone content assignment. He had mentioned before that they have courses that they came up with as part of the CHIP process to make sure that they're getting at certain areas. This is a capstone project that's based on math practices. This is the 2nd standard in math that a lot of people really struggle with. And so they came up with an assignment that they do. They pointed out it is based on something that came out of the University of Ohio. They've aligned it to standards and indicators. It's a unique kind of project that you could say it had to do with trigonometry and the height of a building. And you'll have to contact Dr. Almori for more information about the mathematics of it. But that's the kind of thing you could make it very local and say, well, for this building, or it has to be on campus, so it's not something that they can go to the internet and get. But I thought that was a very good way to show math knowledge and math content for a lot of areas. And we said that that was fine. So that's another way to do it. And that's similar to what we said in the past about if there's a senior seminar kind of project, even if it's an all-day program, if you can build something like that into the program at some point, that could be acceptable.
One question, Dr. Kozlowski, is do you have to provide course descriptions for undergraduate courses from another institution?
No. The assumption here that any courses that you would identify would have clear titles like, oh yes, that's a world history class. Yes, that's a science research class. That's an English language arts writing class. So you would list the kinds of things that would be obvious, and that's all that you would need. You'd spend a lot of time tracking down those.
That was the only other question we had in the chats, but I'll also just mention before we move on, we've got a lot of the presenters from today here online. So if you guys have any questions about their projects or what they've presented today, you could get some answers.
Or additional information. For Key Assessment 3, Planning Instruction, we have seen a lot of things so far that are mini EdTPAs. And that made sense when EdTPA was brand new in Alabama, and it was very high stakes. And it did come with some time to develop and to plan and to figure out and to do some pilot submissions. One of the biggest things ever about EdTPA is choose the content of your portfolio wisely. And some of the best lessons that could ever be taught probably would not be wise choices for EdTPA. So one of the things I'd like us to really be thinking about is for a key assessment about planning instruction, are you gearing it toward passing a test or showing that your candidate can really plan instruction for the span of the certification area? If you're doing general science and your EdTPA is based on cellular structure for biology, that's really probably a good plan. But it doesn't show that you can teach in the other areas of general science. If it's, it might be at a particular grade level. And so you're really showing that you can teach broadly, that you can use a lot of different strategies, that you can use formative and summative assessments. So Key Assessment 3, you want to be thinking of how can you really address all the standards that deal with pedagogy and the different kinds of teaching. And we'll see things sometimes like uses a variety of instructional strategies. Well, what are instructional strategies that are appropriate to the teaching field? Key assessment 3, if we get just a rubric, it's hard to understand what the expectation is. Seeing the instructions for key assessment 3 can help a lot. We also, for key assessment 3, oftentimes have the issue of people trying to use one common lesson plan assignment for all programs. And so maybe it says you have to have critical thinking in it, but it doesn't say what does critical thinking look like in that subject area. You do not have to use common assessments for CHIP. You can do something different for CHIP. It might balance EdTPA and show other kinds of teaching. If you can take a minute to look at that handout number 5, which actually comes from the SPAs, and I decided this year to deliberately put in a couple of SPA examples for a couple of reasons. One is, I've often said to people, have you looked at the SPA assessments to get some ideas? And they'll say, well, I couldn't find them. Well, they are a little hard to find. You have to go to the CAPE website and look under the program review section. And the next video, I'll put that in there, the SPA link. But I will tell you, not everything is in there. But some of the things that you'll see in the SPA websites are good, some are not. Some aren't fully explained, or they don't quite match CHIP, but there can be some really good ones in there too. The SPAs for English, the NCTE group, and NCSS, Amanda's group and my group, do not have resources there, but according to Bonhe at CAPE, if you reach out to the SPA itself, they should be able to put you in touch with who's the head of that SPA and what do they do in terms of providing resources. It might be hidden somewhere on their website. I would still suggest you look at some of the things that are available, because you'll get an idea of what do things look like, how are they aligned. We've built a lot of, well, all of the key assessment part of CHIP is based on the SPAs. So this is one from early childhood special education, you know, and that's something where we also have a certification area that lines up nicely with CEC. They have a lot of things that are in there that are good. Their rubric descriptors are really good. They show how they've aligned things to standards and indicators along the way, and how they presented it.
One question, Dr. Kozlowski here is, can you require a series of unrelated lesson plans to show a variety of strategies?
Yes, you can. And you can also keep in mind for Key Assessment 3, it does not actually have to be taught. That might give you more freedom. It doesn't have to be connected to a field experience. I would do something for social studies. I would do something along the lines of saying, you have an assignment where you have to give me 10 lessons. You have to have at least 2 from each of the that are specific to economics, geography, history, and government. You have to have 2 that combine 2 or more areas. You have to span grades 6 to 12. I would say, here's a list of social studies strategies. You have to combine at least 60% of these into what you're doing. That would be one way to do it. Others have, and I know the SPAs accept very complicated unit plans, something that's bigger than just, well, here's an EdTPA prep. So that's something I think is becoming more evident as we've been going through all of these different years and sharing things, that a single lesson plan is certainly not enough. And 3 to 5 on the cell does not show all of general science. Okay. The internship. This is an area where sometimes we get reams of paper turned in the binders. And it's your main internship assessment, which is usually a large document. It might be the Danielson framework. We see AQTSs still come in, even though we've moved to the ACTSs. So that raises some questions. And people will try to take the program specific standards and align them to those common assessments. Well, that is taking something that's very specific and it's aligning it to something that's much more general. And so you really don't know if the specifics were taught. So if you have an English standard about creative writing and you align it to integrates writing in the learning process, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the same kind of writing. And so that provides at best weak evidence. It says, well, there's an opportunity there, but do we know we did? That's what they did? No. So people had said before, can we do an addendum? Well, yes, you can do an addendum, but if you do that and everything's in the addendum, then you do not need to turn in that monster document as part of your CHIP submission. I hope that makes things a little bit easier for people in trying to figure out, do we put everything everywhere? No. Internship portfolios can be used. Your internship assessment for CHIP purposes does not have to match your common assessment in terms of format. So if you use that traditional, typical kind of rating scale that's done by the university supervisor and the cooperating teacher and all of that, that doesn't mean you have to use a rating scale kind of assessment for the CHIP purposes. Maybe you want to do a portfolio from the internship from that, and that's perfectly okay. That was an aha moment this year with some of our submissions, and people said, well, can we do it that way? Sure. And it worked out kind of well that they did it that way. Make sure you explain who uses the scoring guide. Typically, we would see the cooperating teacher and the university supervisor both score the candidates. That can happen a couple of times during this semester for formative. And then there's usually some kind of a summative assessment. It's okay to just report the summative assessment. You may want to show growth over time or talk about it that way, and that's fine. You cannot average the assessments of the cooperating teacher and the university supervisor. Those need to be reported separately because that might be a really important data point. If you find out one group typically rates lower than the other, you'd want to say, well, what's going on here? And try to figure that out. The comment on the screen about the data table must match is sometimes we see data tables we cannot align to the instrument. And we're not sure why that happens with internship assessments because this is typically only where we see it, but that's where we see it. So just make sure that it matches well. Sorry for coughing in your ears. There's an example in NCTM in their SPA about their internship, and you have that handout. And I thought that was a really clear one because of the way they explain things. They have very good rubrics, and it takes a long time to write a good rubric. So this is somebody who's actually done a lot, and it's one part of, no, it's more than one standard. Very simple in terms of can you understand it and the wording, and it really meets that criteria of a rubric is really an instructional device to tell people what is to be expected in there. So whatever your teaching field is, if you're struggling to write a rubric, I think this is a good resource to look at. And if you're working on a math, you can say, oh, boy, that looks really, really good. They had included at the end of theirs what they require for lesson plans and how they're doing it. And I thought it was a decent, simple one. Okay. Where Amanda stopped right there has an interesting thing. They have groups of exceptionalities, ethnic and groups that you can look at. Sometimes we see these in there and they'll align that part of something to, this is where we address diversity. Well, that identifies forms of diversity, but it doesn't necessarily, that alone is not sufficient. You have to ask other questions. What did you do about this knowledge? How does it impact your instruction? Things like that. If we were all together, I think we'd give you more time to look at all of these, but it's hard to do that in this online environment. But we just wanted to point out some things for you all to look at to see how this would work. Questions, challenges you're all having with key assessment number 4 internship? This is a quiet group today.
I have a question.
Sure.
This isn't specific to assessment number 4, but obviously there's a lot of overlap between CHIP and CAPE.
Yes.
Could you talk just a little bit about the differences just in terms of reporting and site visit, or, you know, the commonalities?
Sure. And we talk in Alabama about their comprehensive visits that involve both the CAPE part of it and the program part of it. The CAPE part of it really looks at the EPP as a whole. CHIP looks at each program individually. CAPE is now required by the state. Everyone is in the process of seeking CAPE accreditation now if they haven't attained it already. They're through their normal national accreditation cycle or going up for their first CAPE one. The CHIP documents and the reports that you receive feed into CAPE. A lot of it has to do with standard 1 and content knowledge. Clearly, you can also talk about, well, we've looked at CHIP for standard 2 in CAPE and clinical experiences and how they're sequenced and meaningful and all of that. Standard 3, it touches on that because you have to have clearly sequenced programs for CHIP. So that's part of it. Doesn't do any good whatsoever for standard 4 and program completers. And with standard 5, you have program level assessment that you could talk about for 5. With CAPE, you're using a small number of key assessments that all of your initial candidates take, or advanced programs have each of their own, but there's a clear structure for it. So you would, for CAPE, for your internship assessment, let's say you use Danielson. You report all the Danielson data and you divide that, then you disaggregate it then by program and put that into your self-study report. But we may not need to see your Danielson framework at all as part of CHIP. Does that help, Ann?
That does help, actually. What about in terms of the site visits?
Okay, during the site visit, your focus is on CAPE. One of the things that will happen, whether it's Dr. Meyer or myself, Amanda, who's ever there for the site visit, and beforehand, it actually starts when we first meet with the chair and the formative feedback report, is we explain the Alabama program review process for all of the visits that have happened so far in Alabama. The programs are currently approved under the old system without problems, because in the old system, it was either met or not met. And we explained to them that Alabama is transitioning to this SPA-like process, and that is institutions are in the process of transitioning. I've encouraged institutions, they usually have now their first set of reports back in time to submit, to do a resubmission to address any conditions or unmet standards before the addendum or the site visit, so that they can talk to the site team about, we're on this, we know what we're doing, we've made great progress in understanding how our programs will work with the assessment system. And I am not aware of any condition that has been cited in Alabama based on CHIP. And that's largely due to the institutions being able to say, this is where we are and what we're moving towards.
So it's one site visit when CAPE is coming for their site visit, then the State Department comes as well?
No, we don't,
Am I
no.
correct?
No, CAPE comes and does the site visits. We have traditionally attended, we have always attended when it was in person and now virtually. But when we go in the role as the state consultant for the visit, the focus is on CAPE, not on the state standards. We can do this process without taking time away from CAPE.
So there's not a separate.
No, there's not a separate site
from the
visit, no.
state. Okay, okay. And what about the timing of the report that's due for CAPE before a CHIP versus CAPE?
I don't want to speak to CAPE deadlines because I probably get them wrong.
It's usually 6 months before the site visit.
Right.
The study report is due.
Right. We try our best to get you the reports back in time to put into that. But if there's a problem that they didn't turn around on quickly enough, which did happen in the past, we explain that to the chair and to the site team that this is not the institution's fault. Again, all of their programs are currently approved. We're moving to this new SPA-like process.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad you asked that because I think a lot of people have been afraid of CHIP causing them problems in CAPE. And I think I would say it's actually been helpful for a lot of our institutions. I don't know if there's anyone on from AUM, UNA, South. They've had recent visits. JSU, if they want to speak to that.
Anna, this is Kathy. May I ask
Hi.
the question?
Sure.
If our programs are approved until 2024, we will submit our CAPE report next spring in 22.
Right.
And we plan to submit our CHIP information in 22 as well. So to be, because we've designed all new key assessments and trying to get everything kind of, so what you just said kind of gave me pause, because you said you would try to have them back before the CAPE visit. But if we're technically approved until 2024, I mean, we should be okay anyway. Is that correct?
That I believe so. I can never really fully speak for CAPE.
I mean, if our programs are approved to 2024.
If you submit in 2022.
Right.
In June, and I think you're the only institution submitting for a comprehensive review that year.
I think we were the last.
You're the last.
In CAPE visit.
Yes. In June, I mean, you would probably expect to see them back, knock on wood, and no more crises, by the end of the fall semester. If that's too late to go into your self-study, then, we explain to the chair, and you would too, that there will be reports coming in the addendum. And that has happened. And really it's worked out all right.
Okay. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah. A related note to that is, because you said you're designing new assessments, give us as much data as you can. CHIP requires 3 years of data or a reasonable explanation. So if it's a praxis test, we've had praxis tests now since what, 2003, 2004. So if you don't have data for a praxis test, you better have very low enrollment in the program to explain that you can't report for that reason, even if you go back multiple years. If it's a reasonable explanation, you're okay. Okay, I think we're moving on to key assessment 5, effect on student learning. This is another one that has been, a lot of times we see that mini ed TPA. Well, that's not the only form of assessment. It can be, did you give a test in the internship and did you write a good test? Did you analyze the results and figure out what to do with it? It could be a performance assessment. It can be something very unique to the teaching field, some kind of project-based learning that you're assessing. If you look at NCTM number 5 in the resources, that's another good example of assessing student learning. And don't let the word math scare you. You can understand what they're doing in terms of outlining the how they do the assessments. I don't know why math has some of the best examples that are out there, but they certainly do. There's also an example from TESOL, these English for Speakers of Other Languages. And part of it's really good. And part of it is, please don't copy that part of the example. They talk about assessing. It's actually a combined kind of assessment, which we're never really keen on, but part of it is on planning, and they give you 5 different instructions or 5 different ways, strategies for teaching in ESOL. And then do you assess? But there's only 2 items in the rubric, one on planning and one on assessment. So if you get a 3 out of a 4, you don't know what to do to improve. Or is it that you're good at some strategies and not others? So if you look at that TESOL one, I think it's a really good way of saying, here are different strategies, the same as you might have used for key assessment number 3. But I think that rubric would be a lot better if it aligned, if it collected data based on each of the strategies in ESOL. Does that make sense? If you have just one criteria that says analysis of student learning, you don't know what that one number means. You have to break it down further. But it's a good idea of how to incorporate the strategies. If those of you, and I know I saw some folks from Montevallo here, and I know that they are just a couple of months now away from presenting. If you have something that's based on EdTPA right now, please don't panic, but please be thinking, what can we do better? Now, for those of you who are coming up around to your 2nd cycle under CHIP, I think those are, you should be thinking along these lines about what might you do differently to expand that assessment. All right, questions about impact on student learning or for the instructional support areas. It's a little bit different, but any key assessment number 5 questions? I think I'd say so far, they've been okay. They haven't been, we haven't seen some of the other examples that we've been able to see to say, wow, but we will get there. And we will share them when we see them. We have another presentation. I want to give this one a special introduction. We're expecting the resolution to be on the board agenda next month to approve the University of South Alabama programs. They finished their CAPE visit. Actually, it was about a year ago, but then we're cleaning up some of the CHIP stuff. This is the first institution to have all of its programs go to the board with a full recommendation for all met, no conditions, no unmet standards anywhere. I think I was almost as thrilled for them as they were and pleased in their own work. And I know we have quite a few reviewers who are in the session today. You know how impressive that is. Their secret to success was their leadership. And I think Matt and Josh are going to do a really good job of explaining how they were able to have a consistent structure and yet have the programs do the work. We've always said that CIEP needed to be done on the program level, and they've really answered some questions about that quality control piece. So let's hear from the real experts.
Hi, my name is Josh Wooden. I'm the certification officer for the University of South Alabama.
And I'm Matt Binion. I am the Director of Academic Assessment here at South Alabama as well.
And Dr. Kozlowski asked us if we'd be willing to share some of our experiences with CIEP. And since our programs are expiring this summer and the board hasn't voted on our renewals yet, we said, absolutely, we'll be glad to help. Our on-site visit was in February of 2020, and maybe one of the last in-person visits before COVID. But it seems like we've been working on CIEP forever. Thankfully, we are coming to the end of our comprehensive review, and we are hoping for a good outcome. So we wanted to share a few things that worked well for us in the CIEP process, things that we would do again, and hopefully that you find beneficial if you aren't already doing some of these. To preface, Matt and I are merely supporters in this process. We have great faculty members who put in a lot of time to get these right. We also had Jennifer Simpson, who is our Director of Field Services, and she has worked every summer as a CIEP reviewer for the state and really brought a lot of insight to the process. So if your institution does not have someone participating on these review teams, that's a great way to grow your knowledge base. I highly encourage that if you're not doing that already. So moving along, the first thing that worked well for us was standardizing what we could across programs. For example, with our course summaries, all had the same template. We put a description, list of topics, list of assignments, and the standards that would be covered in that course. So every program used this same template. For our rubrics and data tables, all were in the same format and all had scoring levels of 0 to 3. So this helped for internal review processes when we were going through before we submitted, as well as for external reviewers. So if you saw a South Alabama submission, you were already familiar with the format and you knew what you were going to get. Next would be our resubmission timeline and sequence of revisions. So all programs generally follow the same timeline, with everyone beginning by addressing curriculum conditions first. So as a group, we met and discussed some common conditions with curriculum problems, as well as the necessary revisions, and then set a due date for a few weeks in the future. Then following that same format, we did that again, but with individual key assessments. So we would look at key assessment 1, set a due date for a few weeks down the road, come back and revisit. And then we ended with field experiences. And before a program was finalized for resubmission, either myself or Jennifer Simpson would verify that all conditions were addressed, and Matt would verify all data were accurate. This kept everyone on pace and gave us an opportunity for an internal review before we resubmitted. So there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of text. And if you look at it long enough, it all kind of starts to run together. So we think it was useful for us to have multiple eyes on it before it went to the final resubmission. Lastly, asking questions. So we asked Anna a lot of questions, but we also made sure that they were very specific questions. Many times it was just our own interpretation of a condition. And if she thought we were on the right track or not, and how we were interpreting that. Also, we all know that key assessments must be unique to their programs, but we also know that there are some commonalities. So we would share her feedback with everyone in our college who was working on CHIP. So anytime we had a question, whatever the response we received from her, we would share back with everyone working on CHIP. So we kind of kept everyone on the same page that way. And if there was a substantial change, we would run our ideas past Anna before we started implementing. For example, when we were informed that the internship portfolio that we use for internship key assessment could not also be used to assess content knowledge, we had to start from scratch. So we went back and forth with Anna until we found a solution. So our faculty had some ideas and how they wanted to assess content knowledge if we couldn't use the internship portfolio. And we kind of went back and forth until we worked out a reasonable solution there. And then we were able to submit that. So those are some things that have worked well for us along the way. Now I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who will talk a little bit about data sharing with our faculty and crossovers with CAEP.
So one thing we learned through this process was where we could combine CAEP and CHIP processes together allowed for a much more synergistic approach for both the administration and the faculty. One thing that we really stress with our faculty moving forward, but also while we were working with CHIP, was keeping it simple. Where we could kill two birds with one stone, we would. So using the same CHIP process, the same CHIP assessments as we would in CAEP, using CHIP to satisfy CAEP requirements, essentially, beyond what's in Standard 1, but also for Standard 5. So for example, using this CHIP review process, this back and forth that we went through with our faculty, documenting that process and using that for our continuous improvement processes for CAEP 5.3 and A 5.3. Again, it allows us to document what we're doing for CAEP purposes while we're also in the CHIP process. We've also been lucky that we've been able to use both what we were using for CAEP, but then what we modified with CHIP to use for our student learning outcomes with our institutional effectiveness staff. So for SACs, we were able to use the CHIP assessments to satisfy the student learning outcomes. For example, having student learning outcome revolving around content knowledge that was uniform across all the teacher preparation programs that relied on data from Praxis content tests, for example. We were able to now, when faculty go in to report that data once a year for SACs purposes, it is data that they've already been privy to, and they're not having to they're not having to come up with something new to assess in their courses and in their program, because they're already doing a very large amount of assessment in their programs already. And then, as Josh reiterated, using common assessments, common rubrics, common language, common levels of scoring really allowed for intra-program conversations. And we'll talk about that in a second. When we're using the same terminologies and when we're using the same proficiency levels, it allows for a greater understanding of parity between programs, especially in courses that are taught across programs and content that's taught across programs. One of the big changes that we made throughout both the CHIP process and the CAEP process is how we review data at the program level. One thing that we used to do was to review program data once a semester or once a year in an overall assessment committee kind of structure where all the program heads came together and we review data. One thing we found through all of this is that our frontline program faculty, our junior faculty, our assistant professors, our supervisors weren't seeing data, weren't being privy to data that was being collected. And so we've changed to a monthly program review meeting that is part of the already scheduled program review, program committee meetings within programs. So at each meeting, before each meeting, the department chair and myself have designated a set of data that's specific to that program, but common across all programs for review. So for example, in September, all programs might review praxis data. At that meeting, they go through a standard set of questions for review, and then they report those findings back to my office for documentation, but it's also for analysis of common dynamics and common issues. So that is allowed for some intra-assessment, intra-program triangulation. So for example, using EdTPA planning task data to compare ability to plan instruction data from our teaching and learning portfolio. Very similar task, very similar data, but using that data to figure out if our students aren't doing well in one, is there a corresponding issue in the other? So that has really allowed us to pinpoint things much earlier in the process. For example, how we structure our lesson planning templates earlier on in the program. Again, those issues wouldn't have come to light had we not been looking at multiple assessments. And then as I mentioned, standardizing the questions. Every month we know what data programs are looking at and what questions are being asked, and we're able to keep track of those things. So it's really allowed our faculty to get used to continuous review and continuous improvement in their programs. It's no longer a 1 hour meeting at the end of the semester. It is a continuous thing that they know is an expectation of their program. And we've been able to see some very good benefits from that.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Thank y'all for allowing us to share some of our insights, and good luck to you in the process.
I do want you all to know that Josh and Matt can smile, and you should see them on the days when they drop off binders here and how much they're grinning. They have done a lot to really show, I think, how to create a culture of evidence. That was the big phrase that we kept hearing when CIEP was starting. You know, how would you have a culture of evidence? And they have explained how they have made that happen at their institution. Key assessments in general. We want to make a couple of changes to the rubric. Again, I think they're not huge changes. I think we want to look at that. And I think we've talked a lot about, can you use common assessments effectively for program-specific purposes? The assessments have to very clearly address the program-specific standards. And if you can do that with instructions and maybe having very similar rubrics, but allowing programs to change them in some ways, that may be a way to do it, but you need to be very clear on, we are meeting program-specific standards and not just saying, well, they write a science lesson, so it's a science assessment. What does good data analysis look like? You give us the data tables, and they are nice, aggregated, summarized, short. So reviewers should be able to look at them, and big numbers should jump out at those. Oh, that's a low point. That's a high point. What category is that? So when you start writing the narrative part, you just want to identify the significant data points and explain why they're significant and what you're doing about it. We sometimes have people who must spend a lot of time with a lot of coffee and get a horrible headache from repeating what's in the data tables. Well, that's not necessary. You need to analyze, identify the significant data points, and talk about where you go from there once you've identified those. Amanda, can we pull up key assessment 7, or I'm sorry, handout 7?
Sure.
To look at those changes that we're thinking of making. Our internet is very slow here at the State Department for the last couple of days. We're not sure why. Oops, is there a way to flip that? Oh, that looks pretty.
And just to remind everyone, this is your handout 7.
Under the use of data analysis for continuous improvement, specific programmatic changes are identified. That's where appropriate. You know, you don't have to make a programmatic change every year, but if the data suggests doing something, then you need to do something.
One question, Dr. Kozlowski, when program numbers are very low, is looking for trends, high and low numbers, and talking about how we are addressing them adequate for data analysis?
All right, when program numbers are very low, if you have less than, it's at the bottom of the rubric, 5 years of data to reach a minimum N of 10. I don't think there's a chemistry program in the state that's doing that. We have a lot of programs that wouldn't reach that. You do not have to report data when it's that low, but you can talk about, we do look at it. We have made some changes. We're following these trends. You can still talk about what you're doing to show that you're looking at those scores, but you can't do much in the way of data reporting. For those of you who weren't around when we started CHIP, the original version of this rubric, which is very similar to this, it started when we looked at rubrics from multiple SPAs and we came up with something. And every year we tinker with something on it to try to make it a little bit better, a little bit clearer. And our processes in the review are a little bit different than the SPAs. So different things have just made us say we can do this better. If you all look at that later and you think of something that would make it better, you can just let us know and we'll be glad to take it into consideration. We've always done that with CHIP as we go forward. When you're talking in the cover sheets about key assessments, let the reviewers know what's in the data. A large program might want to include retakes, but just let people know that so that they'll know why that N is bigger than the N at the table, in the table at the beginning of the document where you say how many people were enrolled and how many people completed and how many people were recommended. How we talked before a little bit about data must be disaggregated by program level. Those ETS institutional reports, I mean, we have reams of paper. We just don't need that. EdTPA, we still had a couple of submissions this year that tried to use EdTPA for key assessment 3, planning instruction, and 5. No, EdTPA is only EdTPA. For key assessment 4, explain how the rubric is used. Is it based on an overall holistic scoring of how the candidate did in the internship? Is it from every observation? Some people have it tied to artifacts that the candidate submits, others don't. Who scores it and when? Anything that just helps the reviewer understand what they're about to see. The cover sheet also asks that you explain how the assessment was developed. Well, you know, at TPA, it was developed by Pearson. That's all you have to say. Not all of our reviewers are involved in educator preparation or not currently involved in it. We have some retirees, we have some P-12 teachers, we have State Department staff, and they may not know what we think is common knowledge. All right, we are June 1, 2021 is a Tuesday. That is the submission date. We're going to be virtual this year because of the pandemic, which means we have to get the documents to the reviewers, and it's not fair to ask the reviewers, especially those who are retired or working at home, to print copies of things. And I don't know anyone who likes reviewing without a pencil in their hand. So we know that that is not going to make you happy, but we are asking for 2 hard copies and 2 flash drives. Be very, very careful if you use screenshots and PDFs, because sometimes they shrink or they're blurry. And, you know, if we see that in a binder, then we'll try to go to the flash drive. And if we can't find it either place, there's nothing we can do. We've had people who give us crosswalks of one set of standards to another set of standards. And crosswalks can be a very useful tool within your institution for how you're doing some things. But we can't take crosswalks from program-specific standards to professional studies standards or in-task standards or CAPE standards and use that as evidence of meeting program-specific standards. So I'm not saying they're not useful at all, but they're not useful to reviewers. And finally, make sure that your binders and things are organized clearly. We made a chart that is in last year's PowerPoint on organizing clearly, so we won't take the time to go over all of that again. And typically, about 3 weeks before things are due, we send things, I send a detailed report out saying, okay, here's how to package things. And that will be a little bit different this year because we're going to be mailing submissions to various people. Amanda and I want to know, what can we do best to support you as we're moving forward? We threw some ideas out there. What do you want to see us doing in the next year? If it's nothing, I can take a long vacation as soon as it's safe to go anywhere. Oh,
Dr.
thank you,
Johnson
Lori.
says she appreciates the support provided so far. It's been tremendous and helpful.
Lori's one of those people who's the leader in her institution for CHIP, and she does a great job. Works very similar to Matt and Josh at South Alabama in terms of gathering questions and providing consistent answers. And one of the reasons we don't deal directly with faculty is because we want the institution to have the leadership across programs to say, this is how we're going to do it. All of the questions. Any particular order then for all of the questions?
And I think it's important to talk about too, each institution's needs may be different, and we certainly want to address it in that way. So if there's one on here that you look at and say, this would be really helpful for our institution based on where we are, then if you'll just get with us and let us know that, that would help us help you.
It has been amazing to me over the last, I guess, 6 to 7 years since CHIP was first thought of in the state, to see how it's developed and to hear the caliber of the conversations and the way people are thinking about it. And fundamentally, I think CHIP is meant to be a structure. It's not telling you how to do things. It's saying how do your programs meet standards. And I get so excited by some of the ideas that are out there and how much collaboration is happening. You cannot do CHIP in isolation. You have to be talking, whether it's to the provost or to your partners or to the State Department or your colleagues or other departments at your institutions. The more that people can talk and say, is this clear? Am I getting what I need out of this to improve my program? The better. I know Dr. Meyer was on here earlier. I don't know if she was able to stay for the full thing. I don't know if she wants to say anything. Amanda, do you have any last thoughts?
The only thing I would just reiterate is what you just mentioned or talked about, and saying all the folks today that presented shared that this is truly continuous improvement. It's not filling out a form. This will not be completed in a month or two. This takes years of collaboration and time. And, you know, I think these folks that were here today could probably offer a lot of insight into any questions you have beyond Dr. Kozlowski and myself.
We're the process experts, but we're not experts in preparing teachers in all of the teaching fields. We're glad to have people here. Our presenters. We didn't ask anybody if they could present, but they didn't say absolutely. We also had some support from AUM. They gave us some advice on doing a meeting, and then there are two people at the University of Alabama who also were very helpful, James Harden and Lisa Matheson. Also, they gave us some hints on Google for Dummies. They should write a book. I think that title might be copyrighted, but they were very helpful in making us brave enough to start this kind of work. So I want to thank you all. I will tell you, as a former teacher, it's extremely rare for me to finish 9 minutes early. But we appreciate you all coming out, and let us know how we can help you. Thank you. You have our contact information. Notice Amanda gets her full name. I just have my first initial. We'll just hang out for a few minutes in case there are more questions. But those of you who are wondering, can I go now? Yes, you may go now.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Amanda.
You're welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks, Amanda. This was wonderful.
Well,
very cool, very detailed. So thank you for that.
Thank you for all you've done to help us.
I'm thinking out loud right now. This is Gail Duenas from AUM.
Hi, Gail.
And I think one of the things that really is tugging at me is the fact that, you know, all of us are moving in a virtual world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing the struggles that our students are having, our candidates are having, to provide meaningful lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And so certainly it is a whole new era, a whole new world. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, I absolutely agree. I feel like I'm a first-year teacher doing this. Your wait time's different, and I don't think I've quite figured out how do we do engaging kinds of things, you know, and we usually have more discussions when we're in person. I've been involved with something where it's in a Google Classroom. And so I can see how it, you know, in the future, I'd love to be able to say, okay, those are breakout rooms for the different content areas or different topics or something. But I think we're going to have to figure out how to do best practices in instruction in a virtual environment. And that is a challenge for all of us. I am so amazed that teachers have been able to do as much as they could do in the last year.
Yes, and I've noticed the difference, the vast difference between schools, and I get to observe method students, practicum, and interns, and I've noticed the vast difference in equipment availability, internet connectivity, etc., between one school and another. Yeah. And that's not something that we can standardize. It calls for, well, I'll use the word differentiation, accommodation. But that is what I'm realizing now. I had a chance in this past week to make 6 different observations via Google, via Zoom. And I'm seeing struggles in how the classroom teacher who is modeling for my students how to provide a very meaningful lesson that doesn't just showcase worksheet after worksheet. And that is of great concern to me. And so I'm having a lot of conversations with my students that you have to encourage, find different ways, and I give them suggestions of how they can engage their students, even kindergartners. I mean, I'm focused on early childhood, even kindergartners, to talk to one another. It's not going to be in the traditional, breakout room because it's different. But I'm really talking with my early childhood, the director of our early childhood, and many other educators about really how do we reach children who are very young in age,
who are on the other side of the digital divide.
Right.
I know
exactly.
I see my young nieces and nephews, and I think they were born with a microchip that I just don't have.
Right. And again, the haves and the have-nots.
Yes.
Those who have the support system at home, those who have internet capacity, those who have whatever.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm seeing that. And that is we're not going to solve it, obviously, in 1 month or in one semester. But that's a big issue.
Now, I learned this year that someone was explaining to me that in parts of Alabama, there's something in the soil that makes it very difficult to have good internet communications. I forget what the exact compound was, but that's just a technology hurdle that's going to need to be overcome.
Right. Absolutely.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, then you get, like you said, the resources. I think we have a lot of learning to do about the next world.
Yes. So that's what was going through my mind is this is a whole new world, and the manner in which we affect student learning in a virtual world has to be different than when we're there.
There's so much that can be done. I was at the CAPE conference yesterday and amazed at, in some ways, how it's much better than anyone I've been to in person, because there was no one complaining about, well, I couldn't get that into that session. They said the fire marshal said that the room was too full. I didn't have to travel, and I loved